Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Today, I wanted to talk about using the in-game gambling mechanics as a way to build a little bit of power on your character. This one will be short because there's not a lot to say about this. It's not something that needs to be highly optimized, but it is something you should keep in mind because it will make the campaign quite a bit easier for you. Now, the first thing you need to know is that there are two resources necessary to use gambling. One of them is obvious, one of them is not. So gold's the obvious one, but the one that's not so obvious is that you only get one use of the gambling vendor for each time that you kill a unique monster inside that act. That's something you need to keep in mind because it will be your main limiting factor if you decide to gamble for certain item classes. Now, gold costs vary tremendously depending upon whether you're going for an amulet, whether you're going for a ring, whether you're going for a weapon, or whether you're going for various armor pieces. Armor pieces are by far the cheapest to gamble for. Now, this means that if you're limited by the number of unique monster kills that you've had in the area, then you might find that going for amulets is potentially one of the better options. But it also means that if you've killed a lot of unique monsters, you've got a really difficult choice here. Do I want to gamble for boots 15 times, or do I want to gamble for an amulet twice? Ultimately, the way you want to make this decision is by assessing from your character what are the items I most desperately need to upgrade at the moment, and what's my best path for doing this? Am I likely to get something better than I already have? When you gamble, it seems like it's about 50-50 whether you get a magic item or a rare item. You can get a unique item, but the chances are vanishingly small. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that I believe the best stat players can get on gear in Path of Exile 2 is movement speed. Now, movement speed has new tiers that come online at certain thresholds. Level 1 is where you get 10% movement speed. Level 15 is where you get 15% movement speed. Level 30 is where you get 20% move speed. Level 50 is where you get 25% movement speed. And the thresholds for 30 and 35% movement speed are beyond the campaign. They're 70 and 82 respectively. What this means is that gambling for boots gets tremendously better once you cross one of those thresholds. Now, let's talk about the item levels you're going to get from gambling. Item levels are capped by the furthest progression you've made so far in that act. So for instance, if you're in Act 2, then the highest that you can progress in Act 2 is level 32, because that's the level that you fight Jamanra in. That's the Dreadnought Vanguard. If you're in Act 4, which in early access is Act 1, just repeated on hard mode, then this is going to be level 51. You'll notice that Acts 1, 2, and 4 thus really do align pretty well with those movement speed upgrades, and that means that if you're in Act 1 at the end of Act 1, then it's a good time to go and gamble for boots. Likewise the end of Act 2, likewise the end of Act 4. You can still gamble reasonably effectively for boots in Acts 3, 5, and 6 as well, but it's just less likely to pay off as much as it would in 1, 2, and 4. The other thing that you may want to consider is which particular bases to chase. Do you go for Armor Evasion Hybrid? Do you go for Armor Energy Shield Hybrid, etc., etc.? Here I suggest that you do not go for a pure base unless you are making extensive use of gems that require that same attribute. So for instance, if you're playing a character that is making heavy use of intelligence-based gems, you're probably going to have a high intelligence in order to use those high-level gems. And that means that you could use anything that is pure intelligence, intelligence strength, intelligence dexterity. You can probably make use of those items, but you're not going to be able to use a pure strength or a pure dexterity item. You might though, however, be able to use a strength dexterity hybrid item because those requirements won't necessarily be as odious, and you probably do have some support gems at least that require you to have a fair amount of dexterity and strength. That's what I would be keeping in mind when deciding whether or not to gamble for items in those slots. Lastly, remember that anything that you get, you can always apply an Artificer's Orb to and make it a little bit better that way, at least if it's in an appropriate slot. I'm going to leave it there. May your Val Orbs have interesting results, and may you get more upgrades from spending your gold at gambling than you would do if you did that in real life. Don't do it in real life. It always ends badly.